You can follow him on twitter.com/DaveSimonMMA or /Ringside Report. It is Dave Simon.
Yes, indeed.
I would like to formally congratulate you on your 500th MMA episode of Ringside Report Radio, as reminded to me by Mo Khan.
Well, thank you. It was an excellent show, if I do say so myself, on Friday night. But the guests really made the show very special. We had John Fitch, one of the best welterweights in the world, fights for the UFC. He'll fight Damian Maia, Super Bowl weekend at UFC 156 on pay-per-view. We had Daniel Cormier, former Olympian, a wrestler for the United States, finished fourth, actually, in the Olympic Games, and now is an undefeated heavyweight in Strikeforce. He won the Strikeforce World Grand Prix. He was on the show on Friday night. Gegard Mousasi, one of the best light heavyweights in the world, a guy that's going to come over from Strikeforce into the UFC in 2013, and I think make a big splash. I think Gegard Mousasi might be the best fighter on the planet.
Best name, too, in MMA.
Oh, it's fantastic. Gegard is the man. He's just going to have to prove himself, I think, in 2013. It's going to be very interesting. And we also spoke to former UFC light heavyweight champion, Vitor Belfort. So a jam-packed show on Friday night that I haven't had the time to actually put up on the website yet because I was out of town. I left Montreal right after the show on Friday night, so I'll put the show up on ringsidereport.net a little bit later on this evening. It'll be up early tomorrow morning, so you'll be able to hear the entire 500th episode with all those guests. It was a lot of fun and very interesting stuff from all those guys.
All right, Dave, let's talk a little bit about, obviously we'll get to the big event coming up next weekend, but we were talking earlier about 2013 and MMA and Bellator, and I'm very curious, I'm very intrigued by it because obviously the UFC's had not a monopoly, but free reign essentially. And anytime somebody mentions MMA, they think of UFC, and rightfully so. Dana White's done a great job with that entity and brought it to where it is today. But in terms of, Bellator, we saw the demise obviously of Strikeforce kind of being, enveloped into UFC. It's going to Spike TV. You mentioned they're going to rival in terms of the programming, but can Bellator attract names? Will they spend some money and maybe take a couple of names away, do you think?
Well, that's going to be up to Bellator, and I'm kind of waiting to see what Bellator is going to do with Eddie Alvarez. He's a guy that was their former lightweight champion. He's a very, very talented guy. He lost to their current champion, Michael Chandler, but he's a guy that Bellator really made, and his contract is up. And the UFC has offered him a deal which Bellator now has the option to match. It's part of their contract and their wording that they can match whatever deal that a rival promotion offers when the contract runs out. And I was saying this week on the show that Bellator needs to show that they're serious in 2013 and re-sign Eddie Alvarez. And I think that's going to be the big question. As we all know, in professional sports, money talks. Athletes are going to go to wherever they can make the most money. And if Bellator, owned by Viacom, which is a far bigger company than the UFC could ever really hope to be, if they can spend some of that Viacom money, then yes, they can make a real run for it and maybe steal some of the top stars from the UFC. But it's really going to depend on how much of a commitment Viacom wants to make in Bellator in their mixed martial arts product. And I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think this will be
it could be a situation where they're just buying some programming, right, and not putting a lot of money into it.
Right. This could just be programming for Spike, and let's wait and see. Or they could be serious into getting into the MMA business, and it could be a situation like what we saw in the 90s with the pro wrestling business and WCW. When Ted Turner, a multi-billionaire, decided to get into the pro wrestling business, he started buying and stealing stars from Vince McMahon because the wrestlers there, working for the WWE at the time, saw that there was more money in WCW, so they went there. It was a lesser product. It was lesser known. You weren't going to be the big household name that you were in Vince McMahon's organization, but you were gaining more money. You were making the millions. So if Bellator can be that option, if Bellator can start spending money and stealing stars from the UFC, then yes, you could look at Bellator as a real serious threat. It just depends on, does Viacom really take this seriously, and do they really invest? Because if they wanted to, I think they could give the UFC some real problems. But it depends on what the direction of Bellator will be. as far as Viacom and how much they really want to spend. But they've got the money, right? I mean, they're bigger than the UFC. It's Viacom.
Dave Simon joining us here, talking some MMA on Game Points with Matthew Ross as we talk about perhaps an interesting rival. What about Strikeforce? We don't know what has been the plan with that.
We know. It's over.
All right.
January 12th, final show. We just got the news this week. We were hearing, different things, and everybody figured that Strikeforce was going to be done. I mean, so many of their top stars, their heavyweight division has all pretty much gone to the UFC. Nick Diaz went over to the UFC. Ronda Rousey, one of their big stars that was recently made into a big star in 2012. She's now the UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion and will be headlining a pay-per-view in February. So it really, the writing was on the wall for Strikeforce, and this week we got the confirmation. Strikeforce, final show on Showtime, January 12th. My friend Gegard Mousasi will be fighting on that card, and a lot of very good fights on that January 12th card, that's it for Strikeforce.
So now some of the fighters that aren't going to make their way over to the UFC, are they fair game now for Bellator? Is that something they're going to target, do you think?
Yeah, I think most of the fighters, though, will go to the UFC. I think the majority of guys fighting for Strikeforce, I would say between 60 to 80% of the guys under Strikeforce contract and the ladies under Strikeforce contract as well, as the UFC now having women's MMA, I think 60 to 80% will be moving over to the UFC, and somewhere between 40 to 20% will be looking for work elsewhere. But I think the majority of the people under Strikeforce contract will just be moving over to the UFC, and the rest, well, I think they'll be looking for a job either in Bellator or maybe see if Dream is still an option in Japan. Dream's doing a show on New Year's Eve, which is going to be sick. Very good MMA card, and they're doing a K1 kickboxing card as well. New Year's Eve in Japan, in Saitama, and that'll be a one-night, 16-man, open-weight kickboxing tournament. So the two finalists will have to fight 4 times in one night. That's going to be a sick kickboxing tournament. Peter Aerts, Remy Bonyaski, Semi Schilt, a lot of the top stars.
Forget the Dream stuff.
You don't know who these K1 guys are.
No, I get that, but
these are big stars.
We're limited in the segment here. I want to get to next weekend, Dave. You're hyped about the heavyweight UFC card going.
I'm hyped about everything,
that fight, excuse me.
I'm hyped about the 16-man K1 kickboxing tournament.
Tell me about the Santos versus Velasquez.
Okay, well, Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos, they fought on the first ever UFC on Fox show. It was a one-fight card. And Junior Dos Santos knocked out Cain Velasquez in 61 seconds to become the new heavyweight champion of the world. Since then, he beat Frank Mir, beat the hell out of him. Cain Velasquez has destroyed Antonio Silva, looking like an absolute beast. Both men going into that fight had knee problems. Cain Velasquez pulled his ACL about 12 days before the fight, and Junior Dos Santos actually had knee surgery after the fight. So both of their knees were pretty wobbly going into that fight, and maybe neither man was really at his best. But I hope, and I'm thinking, that both men will be at their very best come Saturday night, 6 days away, the heavyweight championship on the line in Las Vegas. Junior Dos Santos, the baddest man on the planet, the number 1 heavyweight in the world. Cain Velasquez, the number 2 heavyweight in the world. I can't wait. This is going to be a ridiculous fight.
Will it go beyond the first round?
I don't know. I hope so. I'd love to see a war between these two, but they have such punching power, both men. I can't see it going the distance. I really, it's not going to go 5 rounds. I could see it going 2, maybe 3 at the most, but I think this fight will finish within 3 rounds, and we'll see a knockout. Either Dos Santos goes out for the first time in his career, or JDS puts Cain Velasquez down again. Either way, I think it's going to be a great fight on a great card. Joe Lozon taking on Jim Miller on this card. Tim Boach, Costa Philippou, Yushin Okami, and Alan Belcher. Are you kidding me? I mean, these are some great fights. UFC 155 on Saturday on pay-per-view in Vegas. Wow.
Dave Simon, hyped for Ringside Report Radio Wednesdays at 11 o'clock. Check out the website as well. RingsideReport.net. Don't forget they have a Friday show, of course, as well at 11 p.m. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Thank you.